Hello, everyone. How's it going on this Sunday afternoon, Sunday morning, wherever you are in the world? Welcome back to the channel, welcome back to the live stream. My name's Pyotr. We are going to be having an interesting conversation with Professor David Gibbs in just a second. But I thought just to take stock of a couple of things that have happened. We've had important elections in the UK, which I think are going to reposition the UK's ability to govern effectively domestically, which therefore affects foreign policy. We've also had Russia's Victory Day parade and some notable comments from Putin saying that the war is winding down, which I'll be reflecting on later. But we're going to be focusing on the war in Iran and the situation with the peace proposals, or their lack of, and the lack of details. I see David's just joined us. So hello, David. How are you?
Hello, Pyotr. Thank you for having me on your show.
Absolutely. It's nice to meet you. First time, I think, doing this together, but hopefully many more to come. I know you've been on some sister channels of ours on the YouTube community, and I'm glad to finally have you on ours as well. And hopefully we can get you back on a periodical basis to get some reactions to developments. But I think the situation right now seems to be that the Iranians have responded to the American peace proposals. There's 14 points, 7 on each side, but we don't know what either side's details consist of because they haven't released them, which is kind of strange. So I was interested what your reactions were, firstly to that, the sort of secrecy of this, but also just how you think the latest rounds of talks are going, or attempts.
I may have not seen the very latest proposals. I mean, from what I've seen, basically, is that the Iranians want something of a more comprehensive settlement of all of their relations with the United States. That basically would involve some form of reparations through continued control of the Strait of Hormuz, essentially setting up a toll booth, as many have noted, combined with kind of ironclad guarantees. The United States will stop trying to overthrow their government. The United States, in contrast, I think wants a narrower range of focus that will focus pretty much on Iran permanently giving up the right to nuclear enrichment, something Iran insists it's entitled to do. And to the best of my knowledge, under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which the Iranians have signed, Iran is entitled to nuclear enrichment up to a certain point. And so you do have kind of a mismatch. Again, I may not have seen the latest iteration of this, but what I've seen, we have a complete mismatch in terms of what the United States wants and what Iran wants. As far as I could tell, the United States, what it wants is, in effect, well, Iran to give up its nuclear enrichment capability, but it still wants the option of maintaining sanctions that have been on Iran for almost half a century, combined with the continued right to attack Iran whenever it wishes to do so, and to try and overthrow its government whenever it wishes to do so. I don't see anything from the Trump administration being offered as assurance that will never happen again. And so I'm assuming basically that there will be no peace agreement, and will continue either on this kind of ceasefire we've had, where you have an official ceasefire but intermittent combat, as we've seen. The United States boarded a number of Iranian ships, and Iran retaliated by attacking U.S. ships. Or we could have, and this could go on, who knows, for months, or we could have an intensification of U.S. attack with a new round of attack against Iran's infrastructure, maybe ground forces. Either option would be disastrous. Even the one of just low-level intermittent combat would mean the Strait of Hormuz would be closed. And this is going to cause a major catastrophe in the world economy. It's a question of which side is more capable of putting up with pain. And my bet is Iran is more capable of putting up with pain. The truth is they're much more used to it. They've experienced economic and military pain over an extended period of time. And my guess is the U.S. will buckle long before Iran will buckle.
Well, I mean, I think that's been the prevailing sentiment amongst a lot of people for a while now. We're in month 3 of this conflict, and I largely put this down to a framing. Of course, it's more complicated, but in essence, it's one side is driven through a sense of existential survival, versus the other, which is egotistical self-interest or self-promotion, right?
Well, you
I
can
don't.
put it that way. I mean, I prefer not to make value judgments, but there's no doubt that Trump's ego is heavily engaged in this.
Yeah, I
And
mean, no, you're free to be more objective in that, but I do have some pretty strong opinions of it, and what I do think is quite remarkable is how one single man, not even a collection, an administration, but one single individual is capable of bringing together so many people from different walks of life, be them far left, far right, centrist, anti-war, pro-war, I don't know, whatever it is, but everybody of a reasonable mind seems pretty critical that this war of choice was completely unnecessary. And ultimately both sides lose, but it seems that relative, the US is in a far worse position than the Iranians. Personally, I think, I don't know if you agree, but the Iranians have a necessity much more than the Trump administration to ensure that they get what they need or the war demands met.
there's no doubt Iran is facing an existential situation here. The existence of their government, of their entire system of government, is under threat. In fact, it's possible the entire existence of the country is under threat. Trump has threatened to end the Iranian civilization, with the implication of perhaps destroying the whole country. That's his rhetoric anyway. The Iranians know this, so that's certainly true. I suppose where I would slightly maybe disagree with you is I see Trump as much more of a normal president than an aberrant president. He's aberrant certainly in his style, his very unusual style of communications, let's just put it that way. His very violent rhetoric, bloodthirsty language being used not just privately but publicly. That is somewhat new for a president, I'll admit. But in terms of the policy, it seems that every president since 1945 has felt the need to have their own unique war. Every president in American history since 45 has had to be blooded, shall we say. And so this is Trump's war. Obama basically had the Libya overthrow. Biden had the war in Ukraine, which I personally see as very much being provoked by the United States. It could have easily been prevented, but the Biden administration didn't wish to prevent it. And one can go on and on. Every single president has done something like this. In many cases, just as reckless and just as dangerous as what Trump is doing. And so I just see Trump as normal in that sense. And so I know he evokes a lot of very negative, strong emotions, and I understand why. But if you look at it sort of coldly and objectively, it doesn't look that unusual. No, at least not to me.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that has happened now is that the Iranians are essentially accusing the US now of reckless military adventure, is what I think the foreign minister Aragchi accused the US of, and that Iran won't bow to that pressure. So, what's your thoughts on that? Do you think that is the Iranians are going to follow through, or this is simply more rhetoric between both sides trying to make sure they come off as in control?
Well, there's plenty of rhetoric, but I mean, the real risk here, there are a lot of risks, but one of the most immediate ones is the United States follows through on what they've threatened to do, which is to destroy in a massive bombing campaign Iran's infrastructure in a very intense campaign. But I assume they still have the ability to do, at least to some degree. Iran responds, as they are very capable of responding, with their missiles, destroying much of the infrastructure of the Gulf region and of Israel, including possibly the desalination plants. That would be a brutal, vicious thing to do for Iran. On the other hand, they'd respond to an equal level of viciousness from the United States. There's no question as to who the aggressor here is, who the defender here is. I should add, by the way, that what Trump is doing is brazenly illegal, not only according to international law, but according to U.S. law. Looks at the UN Charter, of course. Aggressive military action without UN Security Council approval is illegal. And under the U.S. Constitution, it says, if you read it, for those who bother to read it, treaties are part of the supreme law of the land, meaning they have domestic standing under U.S. law. So if you violate the UN Charter, you're violating U.S. law. On the other hand, most presidents have violated the UN Charter. Most presidents have also violated international laws against foreign intervention, which is banned under international law. Specifically, treaties the U.S. signed, the Charter of the Organization of American States forbids all forms of foreign intervention. That hasn't stopped the United States from intervening again and again. The CIA was largely created for that purpose. So there's a kind of generalized lawlessness. The U.S. is a kind of a country that has a very strong legal tradition. and a high regard for the Constitution. On the other hand, international relations, foreign policy, and security surrounding that issue has mostly been a law-free and constitution-free zone. And in that respect, again, Trump is offering nothing new.
Yeah, I mean, from an IR perspective, I think that generally that there's been a complete disregard for any principle. I mean, you mentioned the UN, but isn't that largely irrelevant these days? I would like to believe in the principle or concept of what it stands for, but we have to be realistic with that. There just isn't any appetite to really adhere to the treaties or to using it for what it's actually for. It seems to me, if you remember back in the 12-Day War, the Iranians were the ones that were sending diplomatic communiques, actually trying to leverage the UN as a means to find mediation or communication, or at least demonstrate that they were the more responsible player versus Israel or America. But the Americans never do that, and there was this attempt at a resolution by the Gulf states a month ago, I think, and it was shot down by the Chinese and Russians. So I don't see where that really plays much influence. And any organization,
Of course, you're right about that. I mean, as a statement of fact, of course, it doesn't play much influence, but that's a decision we've made, that we're not going to regard the UN Charter as a valid document, even though we signed it. We're not going to regard the OAS Treaty as a valid document, even though we crafted it. That's the decision that's made here. And if it's a good decision or a bad decision, I'll leave to others. But there's nothing inevitable about any of this. It's just a matter of decision to act in a certain way. But it has to be emphasized that the legality here is quite clear, and the illegality is quite clear, even if people wish to disregard it.
So what do you think that means for when this comes to end, if it ever comes to an end? I made an analysis a few days back emphasizing that nation states don't really declare war on each other anymore. They haven't done since the Second World War was really over. You have the occasional one, but largely speaking, in modern times, countries just go to war. They have a clash, they have an engagement, and then because war wasn't declared, there isn't any necessity for an official peace treaty. It just sort of fizzles out. My concern with this one is because neither side is willing to make concessions, you're going to see the sort of perpetual. This just lasts indefinitely, like a hot piece. Someone told me
It can't
previously.
last indefinitely because the world economy is going to have major consequences from this that I think will cause it to not last indefinitely. We've only seen, I think, the very beginnings of what the economic effects will be. In my country, the United States, it's, gasoline prices are up by about a third, which is very significant considering how car dependent Americans are and how most Americans really don't have any savings and cannot afford increased expenses of this type. But that's just the beginning. I think the next phase will be rapidly rising food prices due to the fact that much of the urea comes from the Persian Gulf, and in general, agriculture is extremely energy and petroleum dependent. Fertilizers are largely petroleum based. And then after that, the whole economy will be disrupted on a massive scale. Supply chains will break down. This is going to have a huge systemic impact on the whole world economy. And only countries that have very high levels of oil independence, such as Russia, will do well in this. Everyone else will be affected negatively. And the question is, I don't think the world economy can bear that for much longer. Again, once this really hits fully, I think there'll be enormous pressure on the United States to back down or to escalate, as I said, to play their last card, which is massive destruction of Iran or perhaps insertion of ground forces, both of which would escalate the level of catastrophe. I don't see this having a happy ending, let's put it that way. I think that in terms of the least unhappy ending, I would say what we would see is after enormous pressure, the United States essentially capitulates and backs down. I don't think Iran can capitulate. I don't see any way they can do that except allow their country to be defeated and possibly destroyed, at least in the medium and long term. The United States will be the one to back down, I suspect. Trump will be humiliated personally. It will be very possibly a crushing blow to American hegemony, perhaps the end of American hegemony, certainly the beginning of the end of American hegemony. The rise of a truly multipolar world, I think, will come out of this, which I don't think in principle is a bad thing. I just hope we have a soft landing rather than a hard landing. And I fear a hard landing could be a very severe economic environment. Um, so, but I think that, inevitably this would lead to accelerating the American decline. For a variety of reasons, I think that might not be a bad outcome, considering the US has been a very destabilizing force in the world.
But how much worse can it get for the global economy? It looks pretty ruptured right now. How much more can we take? And do you not think there's a bit of a time lag effect here in that
Oh,
what
I
we think?
understand that. I mean, you still have many countries still have reserves of oil,
Mm,
some more than others, and that obviously prevents a collapse basically of activity when those reserves run out in a matter of months. It varies from country to country. China, I think, has a sizable reserve, if I'm not mistaken. The
yeah.
United States has sizable reserves. Other countries have much smaller reserves. Once these reserves start to run out, you'll have first local and then globalized effects of it. Ships, at sea have taken a long time in many cases to reach port. That's been happening, and as the pipeline ends of oil at sea, that will start to have gradual effects when harvest season begins and harvest can't properly take place because you lack fertilizer. We'll start to see food prices rise. So then you'll start to see break down the supply chain. So that the absence, for example, of helium, which is important apparently the production of semiconductors. This is going to have an effect. Um, and so this could take a few months to fully play itself out, but play itself out it will if it keeps going. I mean, much of this, I think, is already the die is cast because, there's been already physical damage to the infrastructure of oil production. Restarting oil production that has been effectively turned off could take a few months to get started. So we'll certainly see, no matter what happens, even if the war ended today, we'll see significant economic impact already. How big the economic impact depends upon when the war ends. And I'm just not seeing any evidence it's about to end, unfortunately.
No, neither me. These two seem, destined to continue this dance for the next month at least. I had hoped that it would be somewhat wrapped up by this point, or that some
Yeah.
kind of comprehensive established set of terms that have been found. Partially because I don't think, like you, that the global economy can stomach it, but also just because neither side really can either put up with it. That there's obviously a lot of emphasis on the US political capital that the Trump administration has, but also, I mean, I think it should be noted that the Iranians have a difficult situation as well. Obviously, the country's been battered by the aerial campaign, but also the oil shortages and the water concerns that were part of the reason that the protests in January actually broke out. So I'm just kind of curious, who do you think has a greater time? Time isn't on their side, so to speak. Who
Well, I
has more
guess the
pressure?
Iranians do. The Iranians, for a number of reasons. One is that it is true they are much more experienced in putting up with economic pain. My sense is the population has rallied. I don't think the Islamic Republic is very popular. I think there's good evidence, good reason to think that it's not popular. I mentioned on yesterday at another show that there's in Arizona where I live, there's a large Iranian expatriate community. I know many of them. I talk to them regularly, and not a single one of them likes the Islamic Republic. Now that's a skewed sample, as we would say in political science, but I think it is nevertheless indicative um, that I sense there's a very substantial opposition to the Islamic Republic. But I think what this war has done is it's solidified support for the government because you naturally rally around the flag if your enemy is threatening to destroy your whole country, which is what Trump has been doing. So I think the Iranians are willing to put up with much more pain than the United States will. And one more point is I
Mm.
think China and Russia are increasingly viewing Iran as not just a worthy ally, but a vital ally. And I don't think they're going to allow Iran to lose this war. If Iran runs out of missiles or missile launchers, which they're not about to do, by the way, there was a recently leaked CIA report that they've retained about 70% of
Yeah.
their missile munitions. That's a lot. That's a lot. They still have some production facilities underground, too, not to be discounted. But in the event that down the road they start to run out, my guess is Russia and China will see to it that they get what they need to prevail. Because I don't see it's in Russia's or China's interest to allow the United States to win this one, to defeat Iran. And so I think that it's just a question of who can put up with the economic pain longer And as I said, I just don't think that's the United States. It's Iran that will do so. Trump hasn't yet seen a real collapse of his support. He's starting to see an erosion of his support, but I think he will at some point see a real collapse of his support when his working class supporters, people who voted for him to improve affordability, reduce inflation, advance working class interests, and so on. Well, that's why a lot of people voted for him, rightly or wrongly. I think these people are going to become deeply alienated if they see a collapse of their living standards. That is something people don't forgive. That is always the number one issue, in my view, on voters' minds in the U.S. and in most countries. And I think you will start to see Trump see a collapse of his support. And when that happens, I think you will finally see him do what he will not willing to do, which is pull out, even if it means humiliation.
Yeah, it's quite crazy, really, that he either he's aware of it and just doesn't care, or he doesn't seem to appreciate the significant implications this is going to have, I think, for him at the elections. Which, I mean, are people really that forgetful that even, let's pretend that this conflict wraps up by next week? What will people's memories be so short-lived that they don't remember in 6 months' time what this whole entire situation was about? But on your point about China and Russia, I think there's a difference between strategic patience and strategic endurance. Strategic patience for me, is something that is a bit of a luxury, right? The country that is strategically patient, it has the ability to do so and the luxury to do so, versus someone that is strategically enduring has to, but doesn't necessarily mean have an indefinite time horizon. I'm just kind of curious, though, do you think that this entire war was based on some grand strategic plan by the Trump administration to weaken China? Which is an argument I've heard multiple times, and frankly, I think is complete nonsense.
Um, I think it probably played into it. I think that probably was one motive. As I would see it, the principal motive. Let me say at the outset that Trump is uh, completely going back on all of the promises he made in the election, which is not to be a war-making president. He would be, and in his first term, he did a lot of very violent things and a lot of very illegal things, but he did not start any new wars. And it was actually historically remarkable because he was the first president in his first term who did not have any new wars. And based on that, I think a lot of people assumed it would be the same in the second term. What I think changed, the question is what changed? And I think what changed is that several things. One is that he wanted to be not just a two-term president, but a great president, like Abraham Lincoln or Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He had images in his mind of that happening. And he decided, what is the quickest route to do that? It's winning a war. What did Roosevelt do? What did Abraham Lincoln do? They won wars, all right? And so he needs to win a war. And, he tried, he got his feet wet, so to speak, in Venezuela. And to everybody's astonishment, he pulled off what could be classed as a success from his standpoint. It was much easier than many people thought, more successful, much more successful than I would have imagined it would be, honestly. And, the Israelis then went up to him and said, we have this foolproof plan to not kidnap, but decapitate, kill, murder the Iranian leadership with a missile strike, and it's foolproof. It's here's the evidence we have, here's the intelligence. Not just Netanyahu, but the head of Mossad was there. And Trump no doubt said, well, if the Israelis say it must be true, they know what they're talking about. They always know what they're talking about. And he decided this was the war to be fought that would make him a great president. He would defeat Iran in an easy and simple way, just like Venezuela. He would impose regime change and establish Iran as a vassal state of the United States. And he could claim to be a great president and lay claim to that title, have a trophy. And I think there are other variables too. I think there's always pressure on presidents to go to war. I think that every single president is under enormous pressure by institutional interests led by what Eisenhower termed the military-industrial complex and a broad array of interest groups surrounding it, including elite academia, by the way, which has long been closely connected to the military and the CIA. My doctorate, by the way, is in political science, and I know political science has been very heavily integrated with the CIA over decades. And all of this, I think, leads to a continuous low-level or high-level pressure on every president. And Trump was not immune to that pressure either. Despite his image as a tough guy, he's not as tough as he looks, or likes to think he is. And yes, I think there was probably some issue of China that this would be the shot across the bow if we could so easily subdue Iran, and have Iran become a vassal state of the United States without even that much effort. look, yeah, it should be a warning to China and to Russia that we can do this to you too. My sense, by the way, is that's one of the reasons that Biden was eager to have a war in Ukraine. He thought through sanctions he could destroy the Russian economy. He could knock Russia out of the league of the great powers and also send a message to China that if we can do this to Russia, we can do this to you too. And so I think that was at least a secondary motive with regard to Trump. Again, this is all speculation because I can't read his mind. But this is the best I can do by way of explanation. And he was overly reliant on the Israelis and overly confident that anything they said was true. And it produced a disaster. I think that was the most likely outcome. His own advisors, his military advisors, were, I think, hinting at it that this was going to be a disaster. But he listened to the Israelis, and here we are.
Well, yeah, I differ on a few points. I think you made or comparisons there, but I think that this was a war that was decided rather impulsively. Obviously, the CIA and the intelligence capabilities knew that this gathering of the most important people in the Iranian government was would meet on this periodically in the presidential house or compound, whatever, in Tehran every Saturday. I just think that they decided to strike relatively soon after the peace talks weren't going anywhere. Trump was frustrated. He was bored. He, I think, reactively decided to do it at the persuasion of Netanyahu, who had been quite clearly working on him, so to speak, over the winter. There are, of course, other details to it, but I think Trump thought this would be sort of a 3-4 day thing, and now it's a 3-4 month thing. Or you differ on that?
No, I think everything you said is true. That's how I see it. That Trump basically, he doesn't like long wars. I think he's even more allergic to that than most presidents. And he did expect this to be a short war. And he obviously is not somebody. Trump is not very focused. He's not. I think people tend to underrate Trump, and they've consistently underrated him. But what he does not do well is focus on policy. He has a very short attention span. He's not disciplined. He does not hire disciplined people and does not have any interest in disciplined people. It's very significant that his two chief negotiators are Witkoff and Kushner, who are real estate moguls with no real credentials in foreign policy. They don't know anything about the Middle East, and they seem almost proud of the fact that they don't know anything about the Middle East. And that's very Trumpian. And I think that's the way he makes decisions is impulsively, and more so than any other president, I think. He despises expertise up to a point. I could say that I understand that because, after all, many of the experts basically said, let's not forget the Iraq and Afghanistan wars 20 plus years ago. We were told those would be easy wars, just be no problem at all. We'd be welcomed with flowers, and it'd be a wonderful thing to have a Jeffersonian democracy in Afghanistan and Iraq. We have all these fairy tales, all right? And many of the experts, many people with long experience, Richard Cheney is very experienced, and he was completely behind this. And so I think that Trump was coming out of an idea that look how badly the experts screwed up. They did screw up. I suppose the only thing that's worse than expertise is no expertise. I suppose is another way to put it. The only thing that fails worse than somebody who's an expert is somebody who's not an expert. And I think Trump is demonstrating that. It's what we have now is a classic quagmire. Trump, I think, regrets that he got fooled into this by the Israelis. And in principle, he'd like to get out, but he can't get out, because he's already committed his prestige. And getting out would look like a humiliation and a defeat, which it would be, one that he could not explain. And moreover,
well, that's what I meant by it's his ego, isn't it? Maybe different words like prestige to ego, but that's what I meant.
Okay, that's fine. I'm going along with that. That's fine.
No, but that's what I mean, right? It's a battle of ego or prestige or reputation versus survival, the existentialism for the Iranians. But I wanted to get your take on David on Trump's been just making some comments on the syndicated TV show, what someone calls it, Full Measure. Anyway, he seems to have said he was commenting on the uranium, and he said here, quote, "We'll get that at some point, whenever we want, we have it surveilled. If anybody got near the place, we would know that, and we'll blow them up. The true eloquence of Trump coming through there. He also said, he also attacked Obama on True Social, saying that Obama gave Iran a major and very powerful new lease of life. That was in reference to the JCPOA or nuclear deal, which a lot of people argue is what Trump's sort of going to end up with. If and whenever these two sign some kind of deal, it's just going to be the same as what the Obama administration achieved about 10 years ago. Do you agree with that, or you think it's even worse or better?
Well, I think that I'm very critical of the Obama foreign policy, and he did a lot of very disastrous things in my view. But one of the positives was the JCPOA, which is a perfectly viable strategy. I, for one, don't want Iran to become nuclear. I don't want any more countries to become nuclear. I find that very dangerous in principle. And to the extent that this prevented a nuclear Iran, that was a good thing. It also laid the basis for eventually a normalization of U.S. relations with Iran, which I think, again, would have been an excellent idea. Trump foolishly tore up the JCPOA. Biden, by the way, validated this and did not renew the JCPOA, which he could have done. All right. So this is as is mostly the case in American foreign policy, the breakdown of U.S. relations and the road to war with Iran is bipartisan. All right. And Biden has a significant role in laying the groundwork for this as well as Trump won. But yes, I think it was a tragedy that Trump felt the need to walk away from the JCPOA. I think that it reflected a lot of things: his unilateralism, his hatred of his predecessors, especially his Democratic predecessors, as need to retrospectively humiliate them. And so I think that out of essentially petty political reasons, Trump basically laid the groundwork for a catastrophic war and then launched that war. History is not going to be kind to that decision. Although, again, I emphasize that there's nothing that abnormal historically about what Trump has done.
No, I think it's an interesting point about the Biden choice as well, actually. A lot of people just think Biden was what, Obama continuation, but in many ways it wasn't. He continued a lot of Trump's policies on China and actually pivoted quite a lot from it. But as you said, I just wanted also to go back to what you'd said earlier, because in the NSS, or National Security Strategy, back in November, there was a clear emphasis on Western Hemisphere, America first, pivot to Asia to contain or take on China. And then 2 months later, even less than that, we've got Operation Absolute Resolve in Venezuela. Okay, that's sort of what we expect. It continues what we saw in the NSS. And then suddenly we go to war and the entire world's thrown up into chaos because now America's actually decided to repivot back to the Middle East. What is he thinking there? Or was it just completely the population of Israel?
There's no strategy here. NSS, you could say, was a strategy of sorts. I think it was in my view, not a positive document, but Elbridge
did
Colby.
He write it? I don't think Trump wrote it.
No. Elbridge Colby, I think the Assistant Secretary of Defense, I believe, was either wrote it or presided over its writing. And I don't like him very much, honestly, but he's intelligent. He knows what he's doing. But that didn't necessarily speak for the White House and for Trump. And Trump may endorse it one day and we disregard it the next day. And effectively, that's what he's done here. Trump, again, he moves from issue to issue. Remember Greenland? Remember he's going to take Greenland, and just magically that disappeared. Then he focused on domestic issues, fighting wars essentially in Minneapolis, in the streets of Minneapolis. Cracking down on immigrants and demonstrators and killing a few of them in Minneapolis. But then he walked away from that. He has a very short attention span. He likes to move from issue to issue. I think the problem is he can't walk away from this issue because Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz. And by all indications, they intend to keep control of the Strait of Hormuz. And Trump may walk away from the issue, but Iran would still control the Strait of Hormuz. And that's something that I think Trump has been alerted to, that would be such a blow to U.S. prestige and power and such a significant influence on the price of oil that Trump simply cannot abide that, hence the continuing war. On the other hand, he can't subdue Iran. He has no real options for subduing Iran that are credible militarily.
He's just also written here, I see, the US accuses Iran of playing games in his first public comments since Iran responded to their proposal. Again, we don't know what are in the proposals. Clearly, he's irritated with the lack of progress. Again, sounds like we're back in February. Iran, quote, has been playing games with the US and the rest of the world for 47 years. They will be laughing.
I don't think Trump really has any real interest in negotiation. What he wants is to present ultimatums to Iran and get Iran to. Sorry, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I think Trump wants to present an ultimatum to Iran that is essentially a document of surrender, in effect, that Iran will get no concessions on any of its key issues that vitally affect its security, but it will basically give up uranium enrichment completely on humiliating terms. And that's the American terms. The United States, basically, that's our peace deal that we're offering to Iran. And Iran, unsurprisingly, is not interested. Bear in mind that JCPOA took months, or if I'm not mistaken, a couple of years to negotiate. It was a complex agreement. All right. Trump wants an overnight agreement, just sign on the dotted line. He promised he wanted unconditional surrender. This isn't quite unconditional surrender, but something kind of close enough to it is what he wants. And he somehow expects if you apply enough force, the Iranians will capitulate. I think, there's a certain crudity to Trump's technique, but it's not, again, entirely unprecedented. The United States doesn't like to negotiate in general. It prefers the use of force. I think there's a certain attitude in the foreign policy establishment, especially the neoconservative wing of the foreign policy establishment, that negotiation is for lesser countries. Luxembourg can negotiate if they want, but America has force. We have the largest military, largest navy, the largest air force in the world. We don't negotiate. We rely on force and get countries to submit to our wishes. I think that is generally how people think in Washington in the foreign policy circles. And in that respect, Trump is not so abnormal as people would like to think he is.
But, you mentioned neocons, but Trump's neither. He's not a traditional conservative. He's not a McCain who, forget, whether you liked him or not, at least he had a degree of, eloquence about the way he spoke. At least he was respectful of his political opponents, unlike Trump. So what is Trump then, if he's not a neocon? He's just mad at that.
In effect, he has become a neocon. In effect, it's interesting because he ran against neocons. He has repeatedly been very critical of them. Recall during the election, a lot of the neocons, the top ones, backed the Democrats. Richard Cheney and his daughter Liz Cheney, backed Kamala Harris. Liz Cheney very actively backed Kamala Harris. I suspect had Harris been elected, Liz Cheney would have been either Secretary of State or Secretary of Defense. And Liz Cheney is very much like her father. That's the core of the neocon movement right there. And Trump was very critical of her. He called her a radical war hawk and said maybe she ought to go into combat and see what that's like. And he almost sounded like he came close to sounding almost anti-war. He echoed some of the vocabulary the left has traditionally used to criticize war. And I think increasingly that was very popular on the right, at least among voters. But what's remarkable is he always seems, in his first term he did this, and even more so in his second term, he invites a lot of neocons into his administration. Most notably, Marco Rubio, a former senator, who's now Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, who's very much in the neocon ideology, I would say, right? Trump, I think, there's always a basic problem you have is the foreign policy establishment is so neoconservative at this point. It's become so overwhelmingly dominant. Neoconservatism has become so much almost the official ideology of the U.S. foreign policy establishment. It's hard to find people who are experienced in foreign policy, of credibility in foreign policy, who are not neoconservatives, right? Trump, again, he's relying on people like Kushner or Witkoff, but you can only go so far with that. You have to appoint some people who have credibility as foreign policy experts, and those people are overwhelmingly neoconservatives. And so I think he has succumbed to the temptation of neoconservatism. And again, there's the Israel lobby, and the Israel lobby, again, is very Israel lobby, neoconservatism. I think the whole logic of neoconservatism has always been to recast the United States like Israel. Israel relies on force. It attacks. It doesn't defend. The Israelis understand the use of military power. And in the mythology, not so much in reality, but in the mythology, they always win. They always perform brilliantly on the battlefield. I think that's how it's seen. And so I think the whole idea is that neoconservatives took the view that America should become more like Israel, and to some extent they've had their way. And I think Trump has been very influenced by the Israel lobby, and through it, neoconservatism. Hence, I think, the willingness to follow essentially a neoconservative foreign policy, not so much in his first term, but in his second term. What he's doing now, again, is coming pretty close to pure neoconservatism. He's given in completely to what he criticized during the election.
Yeah, it's a weird one. I find people like labeling just because it sort of gives you a sense of belonging, right? But so what do you think next? Then are we going to see the Trump administration or Trump just come out reject this? Are these comments indicative that he's just going to reject the Iranian counter proposals or whatever suggestions, and then we're just back to square one?
I don't think the peace negotiations are going anywhere, honestly. I think they're unlikely to lead to an agreement. I hope I'm wrong. I may be wrong. I often am. But I don't really see any reason why that would happen, simply because the Iranians, I'm almost surprised the Iranians are willing to even negotiate on the issue of uranium enrichment, because from their standpoint, they could say that for years we avoided using nuclear weapons, developing real nuclear weapons, actual deployable nuclear weapons. And look where it got us. We've been attacked repeatedly. So now we have to go along and actually develop nuclear weapons. Honestly, I'm sure there are very many people in Tehran arguing exactly that point. And in light of that, I'm almost surprised that at least their public flexibility in terms of negotiating this issue. And if I had to guess, my guess would be it's mostly just to appease their allies in Moscow and Beijing. And in reality, I think they have no intention at this late date of giving up the nuclear option, and they have no intention of doing that. That would be my guess, and that the proposals are for show. The Americans won't accept them anyway, because the Iranians also want, guarantees that the United States and Israel will never attack again and give up their idea of regime change and end the sanctions. And I don't see any possibility of Trump doing that unless the war goes on for a few more months and causes a lot more economic pain. I think, again, I don't think the United States is really capable of negotiating. Negotiating means seeing how the other side thinks, having strategic empathy, and compromising. And I don't see any mood of compromise in Washington. Trump is allergic to the whole idea of compromise. American officials generally are. So again, I don't see that as abnormal. And so in light of that fact, I just don't see a midpoint here where negotiated settlement is possible. The most likely outcome, as I would see it, is at some point the United States just walks away from this conflict and essentially is willing to accept the humiliation of doing so. And this is settled ultimately on Iran's terms. I think that's the most likely outcome.
So we'll have a repeat of some of the US's biggest strategic blunders. This is what Trump's Vietnam, Trump's Afghanistan, the Soviet version.
That's right. That's right.
You think it's that much? What? And they will just what? How would Trump and the US try to frame this as some kind of win? I can't see Trump standing outside of the White House, writing something or reading something like, we are accepting, he's never going to say we accept defeat. So how's he going to frame it?
It's a sensational victory, one of the most sensational in American history. We got everything we wanted. Iran's been vanquished. That's what I'll say. The fact that it may not have any connection to reality has never bothered Trump in the past, so I doubt it will in the future. I think this time, however, even his base is not going to buy it. His base is not going to buy it, and this will be the real undermining of Trump's credibility. I mean, he'll still nominally be president. I don't see him being removed. I think that's a Democratic fantasy, but it'll basically lose all credibility with his base. Trump's popularity is, I think, 40 or 41% according to the Real Clear Politics aggregator. You could say that's pretty bad because the majority don't like him. But if you look at the major European leaders, you're in Britain, are you not?
You're right now, yeah, from London. Yeah.
Right. Well, in Britain, with Starmer's at, what is he at, 18% popularity, 18% approval? He was just wiped out in the recent elections. Macron, basically.
He's more at minus 50 now.
Well, all right. I mean, he's. I'm talking about his approval. His positive approval is like 18%. It's really incredible.
Oh no, it's not even 10. It's less than 10.
Not even 10. All right, I'm mistaken.
He's
It's
the most
lower than I even thought.
unpopular prime minister the country's ever had.
All right,
Even more.
well, that's quite a legacy, isn't it? Macron's in the same boat. Merz, I think, is very close. So the top leaders of Europe are even more popular. So Trump could sink a lot more than he already has. He's got a way to go, but I think he'll get there. I think Trump will end up in Macron's Starmerland in a few months.
But I guess my last question is just simply, again, one is attempting to maybe sane wash. That's what a lot of people who watch the channel have told me, is like, stop trying to apply rational decision making and sort of coherency, logic to Trump's approach. So can you explain to me, I appreciate you're not a psychologist, but can you try to explain, as a professor of history, why does Trump not just get out of this sooner? He seems to get to the point where talks are going very well, but when the moment might be where he can just agree to the counter proposals that Iran has suggested, he's like, no, he just backs off and attacks them again.
Well, like I said, Iran's terms, the terms they are demanding and the terms they really want, are ones basically that would involve essentially a humiliating capitulation by the United States and by Trump. That would be very difficult to explain, impossible to explain, really, to his base. And for that reason, Trump can't accept them. It would also mean extended control of the Persian Gulf through the Strait of Hormuz by Iran. I'm sure they're going to insist upon that. Either that or direct reparations. And direct reparations, of course, the United States would never agree to that. So Iran will control the Strait of Hormuz. And the United States simply will not allow that. And so I think you will get this impasse where what Iran is demanding, and is in a position to demand given its situation militarily, right? And what the United States is willing to accept are such a mismatch that you will get continued conflict, perhaps on and off military conflict, perhaps a new intense wave of intense conflict. But all the same, I don't think you're going to get a short-term resolution. I just don't see any basis for that. I don't see how Trump can do that without essentially capitulating, putting up a white flag in effect, no matter how he puts it publicly, putting up a white flag, admitting surrender, having his Saigon moment, his Kabul moment. And this also could be a turning point in U.S. foreign policy where America ceases to be the dominant power. This could really be the final element that breaks American hegemony and opens up multipolarity, which, again, I personally don't see as a problem. I see that as a good thing. But I think that Trump would not want to be the president who presides over that. That's not the legacy he wants for himself. And so based upon that, I don't see any short-term negotiated settlement here. Wherever, I don't really see any negotiated settlement. I see it basically going on until he simply leaves and walks away.
Wow. Quite the point to end on there, though, Professor David Gibbs of the University of Arizona. Thank you so much. It's really lovely to have you on for the first time. Definitely love to have you back later next week to take stock of where we are. I'm also very interested in your thoughts on what's been happening in the Sahel with the Wagner Group and Africa, and Macron's in Nairobi at the moment talking. So lots to come. And guys watching, we've got Larry Johnson on later. We've also got Matt Tardio as well. So lots coming up on the channel this afternoon, this evening. And David, as always, thank you so much for your time. But everyone else watching, don't forget to like, subscribe, and we'll see you all soon. Take care.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.